The great chamber of the Galactic Council was built to show power. Its high ceilings were lined with gold and polished crystal. Its floor was smooth like still water, and the light above shimmered as if the stars themselves were trapped inside. On this day, every seat was filled. Representatives from hundreds of alien worlds sat in perfect rows, their banners hanging behind them like trophies, their faces bright with pride and arrogance. The air was thick with laughter. They laughed not out of joy, but out of certainty, because to them this war was already won before it even began. At the center of the room stood the council chair, a tall alien with silver skin and long, thin fingers, tapping them against the desk like a judge preparing to pass an easy sentence. He lifted his head and said in a voice filled with calm cruelty, 10 to 1, gentlemen, 10 fleets for every human ship. The numbers speak for themselves. The chamber erupted in more laughter, sharp, loud, and confident. Their generals smiled as if they were already celebrating the end of a species in the corner of the chamber. The Terran delegate sat silently. No laughter, no fear, just silence, his face calm, his hands folded, his eyes locked on the floor, as if he was listening to something the others couldn't hear. The aliens mistook this silence for weakness. They thought humanity had finally accepted its fate. One of the alien admirals, with his wide jaw and dark green scales, leaned forward and whispered to another, "They won't even fight. They know it's over." They both laughed. The sound carried through the rows like an echo of arrogance. No one remembered the last time humans had been mentioned in this chamber with anything but mockery. They were considered a small world, a young species, strong perhaps, but too small to matter. They were a spark against the fire of the entire galaxy. At least that's what the council believed when the final vote was called. Every representative lifted their hands high, glowing light, confirming their decision to launch the largest combined fleet in galactic history. They didn't hesitate, not even for a second. In their minds, this was not a war. It was an extermination. Their screens showed rows of numbers, 10 fleets for every human ship, 20 cruisers for every Terran destroyer. The math was easy and brutal. Even the reporters who filled the upper balconies began writing their headlines. The end of Earth, humanity crushed, the last resistance dies. Every word was soaked in overconfidence, and no one, not one alien in that chamber, wondered why the Terran delegate never said a single word. The sound of the final vote echoed like a hammer, and the council chair smiled, a smile that would be remembered across the stars for centuries. He looked down at the Terran seat and said, "You should have stayed in your system, little Earth. You should have bowed before the real powers." The cameras turned to the human delegate, expecting a protest, a speech, or maybe a desperate plea. But he didn't move. His eyes slowly lifted, and for the first time that day, silence fell across the chamber. Something in that look made even the loudest voices fade. His lips didn't form words, but his stare was colder than the void itself. The kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that meant something was already in motion, something they couldn't stop far below the surface of Earth, hidden under ice, rock, and deep ocean trenches. An old command room flickered to life, in a bunker built before most of those alien empires were even formed. Black screens turned blue, cold air hissed through steel vents, and encrypted codes that had been sleeping for decades started unlocking themselves. One by one, old operators returned to their stations. No orders were spoken. Everything had been prepared years ago. Humanity had always known this day would come. They had watched the council grow arrogant. They had listened to every broadcast. They had mapped every ship, every route, every weakness. The aliens believed they outnumbered humans, but they never understood that numbers meant nothing to those who planned for silence. In the chamber, the aliens returned to their laughter, their mockery rising again like a storm. They didn't see the signal quietly leaving the human delegate's wrist. Invisible to their systems, they didn't know that the countdown had already begun. That while they celebrated a war, they thought they had already won. The human fleet was waking up in the dark like something ancient and patient. Not loud, not proud, but ready. Humanity didn't build its defenses to look strong. They built them to strike without warning. The alien admirals raised their glasses of glowing drink, toasting their victory. The council chair declared the operation would begin in exactly 7 cycles. But on Earth, the first fleet was already moving outside the chamber. Reporters shouted questions at the Terran delegate, asking him how it felt to watch his world fall, asking if humanity would surrender, but he only gave a small smile. A smile not of fear, but of someone who knows a secret. His words were calm, steady and soft, but they would haunt the council forever. "They always forget who we are," he said, before walking away into the shadows of the hallway, leaving behind a hall full of laughter and a galaxy that had no idea what was coming for them. They outnumbered humanity 10 to 1, but they didn't know that sometimes silence is louder than war drums. The galaxy moved with noise. Flashing lights, loud transmissions, and endless chatter about their upcoming victory. But on Earth, everything moved in silence. A silence so deep it could be felt in the air. Far below the surface, where no satellite could see, an entire hidden world came alive. Heavy blast doors groaned as they opened for the first time in years. Underground rail lines shook as massive warheads were silently loaded, and dark screens glowed with lines of green code that no alien system could ever detect. Humans had been called reckless by the Council for decades. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too wild to be a true galactic power. But what the Council never understood was that behind that smile, behind that silence, Earth was building something it never wanted anyone to see until the moment it was too late. In a cold underground room, commanders stood around a giant black table, faces lit only by the dim blue light of holographic maps. No one raised their voice, no one needed to. They all knew the plan by heart. Old protocols, written long before the Council's arrogance had taken shape, were being followed step by step. Thousands of operators sat at their stations with their hands hovering over controls that had been locked away for decades. They had trained in the dark. They had grown old waiting for this day. And now, when the galaxy thought they were weak, those silent hands were ready to pull the trigger. Outside, the oceans churned as if sensing what was rising beneath them. The world looked peaceful, but under the surface, a storm was waking up. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, massive steel doors opened like the jaws of a sleeping beast. The Leviathan-class hulls stirred. Black metal ships the size of cities slowly lifted from their icy cradles. No light escaped, no heat signature was detected. They rose in perfect silence, guided by navigation systems that didn't use signals the galaxy knew. One after another, black warships slid into the dark waters. Waiting for the next step, their engines whispered like ghosts, ready to break free, ready to move. This wasn't a new fleet. This was an old promise, a promise humanity made to itself, never again to be the prey. In orbit, disguised satellites turned their dead eyes to the stars and opened. Lenses hidden behind layers of rock and ice flicked to life. They began scanning not for life, but for movement, for fleets, for weaknesses. They had tracked every alien jump point for years, long before the Council even admitted Earth to their chamber. Every alien thought they were the hunters, but they had been mapped like targets long ago. Every warship's path was already in a human computer, every weak point already marked with quiet precision in the dark. Humans whispered through encrypted channels with no sound, just data, flowing like water through black veins across space. In the human command bunker, a single red light blinked. It wasn't a warning, it was a heartbeat, a signal that the countdown had started. 57 hours until the first strike. No speeches, no broadcast, no panic, only quiet breathing and steady hands. Old soldiers who had been ignored by the Council for decades now held the fate of entire fleets in their grip. Some of them had been young when these plans were first drawn. Now their hair was grey, but their eyes were sharp as steel. They didn't speak about winning or losing, because they knew the Council didn't understand what kind of war this really was. The galaxy believed wars were loud, filled with threats and noise. But humanity had learned long ago that real wars start in silence. Far above Earth, in the darkness between stars, small black drones no larger than a fighter jet detached from their hidden orbits. They looked like shadows sliding through the void, their hulls invisible to alien sensors. They carried no lights, no beacons, no names. Only coordinates and deadly purpose. They fanned out quietly toward the alien jump gates. Places the Council thought were safe. They didn't even know they were already surrounded. That their own warpath had already been written for them. And they were walking straight into it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Council's admirals were drunk on their own numbers. Massive fleets assembled near the jump rings, ships painted in gold and silver. Proud banners hanging like they were marching to a parade. They broadcast songs of victory across every channel. Their voices loud and confident. They believed the humans were sitting on their tiny world, waiting for death. They didn't know Earth was already watching them, counting every ship, every minute, every breath, and writing their end in silence. The Terran delegate, who had walked out of the chamber earlier, sat in a small, dark transport ship drifting near the edge of Seoul. He watched the empty blackness around him like a man waiting for a storm. His hand rested on a small silver device hidden beneath his sleeve. The device ticked softly, marking the countdown, and he whispered words no alien would hear. "They think they have time." His voice was calm, without anger, without fear, because humanity didn't build its survival on panic. It built it on quiet preparation. They knew this day would come. They had trained for it, bled for it, and now it had finally arrived. Somewhere in the cold depths of the Atlantic, the first Leviathan opened its massive engines. Water shook like thunder, but the sound never reached the surface. It began to move slowly toward the launch gate. One by one, thousands of human ships aligned with silent precision. The stars didn't know it yet, but something old and unstoppable was now awake. The Council had started a war of numbers, but humanity was preparing to end it with silence. The galaxy had been loud for days, the alien fleets filling every channel with their arrogance, their grand speeches, and their songs of victory before a single shot was ever fired. Their admirals stood before bright banners and golden fleets, boasting to their people about how quickly Earth would fall, how humanity would beg for mercy, how their 10 fleets would burn a single planet into ash. The stars echoed with their noise, but they never noticed the silence growing beneath it. In the shadow between their signals, humanity was already moving. Black ships sliding through the void like quiet hunters, unseen and unheard. The alien fleets gathered near the primary jump gate, forming what they believed was an unstoppable wall. Thousands of cruisers, dreadnoughts and carriers arranged in a proud arc. They believed no one could face them. No species could break this many ships at once. Their sensors swept across space, but found nothing. Because they were looking for a war they understood, loud, massive, filled with screaming engines. But humanity wasn't coming with a parade. They were coming like a whisper in the dark. And by the time the first alien technician noticed strange static on their long-range scanners, the strike was already inside their formation. In the black sea of space, invisible drones moved like shards of night. They drifted in total silence. No heat signature, no beacon, no warning. They didn't fire yet. They only waited, following the countdown that had been running since the Council's vote. Every human ship moved with absolute precision, years of quiet preparation flowing together like a single heartbeat. And when the clock hit 0, the void exploded, not with noise, but with light and death. The first railgun round hit the lead Council carrier in the spine, splitting its golden hull in half before anyone on board had time to scream. The second round ripped through 3 frigates in a straight line. The third turned a dreadnought into drifting fire. The alien admirals shouted in confusion, their screens filled with red alarms. Their ships died without warning, no targeting signals, no radio chatter, just sudden impact after impact. The humans had struck with mathematics, not with rage. Every shot planned years in advance, every hit calculated to destroy the heart of the fleet. Command ships, communications hubs, power cores. Their proud armada began to break apart before the first alien captain even saw where the attack came from. On the human flagship hidden deep in the void, Captain Mara Stone stood still, her face calm. Hands folded behind her back, no shouting, no celebration, only cold focus. "Execute echo pattern," she said softly, and the fleet obeyed like one living thing. Ships appeared and disappeared between shadows, striking from every angle. Railguns whispered like thunder, missiles flew like silent knives. The alien wall that was supposed to crush Earth was being eaten from the inside. Their numbers didn't matter anymore. Their size was their weakness, their arrogance, their blindfold. Inside the Council's lead dreadnought, alarms screamed, but the crew didn't know where to fire. The sensors couldn't lock onto the Terran fleet because there was no signal to follow. Human ships didn't stay in one place. They danced between the gaps. They struck, vanished, and struck again. Every alien captain gave a different order. Their formations twisted in panic. Their admirals screamed over each other, and that proud fleet of 10-to-1 advantage was now fighting shadows it couldn't touch. The first strike lasted only 6 minutes. But in those 6 minutes, the aliens lost more than they could comprehend. Command ships were burning, carrier wings were shredded, and their entire communication web was shattered. Some ships never even knew they were under attack until their hulls cracked open and their crews were thrown into the dark. Their fleet was built to fight loud wars, but this wasn't war. This was precision. This was a hunt. On the edge of the battlefield, a single alien officer finally caught a glimpse of something. A massive black shape, moving just outside their sensor range. Larger than anything they had ever seen, its silhouette swallowing the starlight around it. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a shadow wearing armor. Before he could warn anyone, a single pulse of railfire erased his ship from existence. The last thing he heard was the silence. Back on Earth, the command room was quiet. No one cheered, no one screamed, because this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Their entire fleet had moved like a knife through a sleeping throat. And the Council, for the first time in its long, arrogant history, realized they were not the hunters anymore. They were prey. The galaxy outnumbered humanity 10-to-1. But numbers meant nothing when death came without a sound. Long before the Council existed, long before alien banners filled the stars, humanity had learned its most brutal lessons on its own soil, not from a war against others, but from wars against itself. The galaxy liked to mock humans for their history, calling them violent, unpredictable, dangerous, but they never truly understood what that history meant. While the Council grew soft behind their numbers, humanity sharpened itself in fire, war, and loss. Humans had survived when no one believed they could. They didn't win by numbers. They won by refusing to die, and that lesson had been carved into their bones for centuries. The Council had forgotten this, or maybe they never cared to remember, and now they were paying for it. Across the galaxy, the alien fleets tried to regroup, but they were moving like blind giants, their formations broken, their leadership shattered, and their pride bleeding out into the void. They sent out desperate transmissions, confused orders, overlapping strategies, but they didn't know that every single move they made was already predicted years ago. Humans had mapped every reaction they would have, every fallback point, every retreat corridor, because they understood arrogance better than anyone. They had studied it, they had once been it, and they knew exactly how to turn it into a trap. What the Council thought was a war of strength was actually a war of patience, and humanity had been patient for a very long time. Deep beneath the mountains of Earth, the Prime Command Room was quiet again. No celebration, only more silent work. A massive holographic map floated above the room, showing thousands of glowing red dots moving in disorganized panic. Alien fleets breaking into smaller groups, trying to retreat or regroup. But everywhere they turned, they found something waiting for them. Black signatures sliding between their formations, human warships that were never supposed to exist. Their Leviathan-class vessels hadn't even entered the fight yet. Only the Ghost Fleet had moved so far, and already the Council had lost almost a third of its force. They had believed humans would crumble, but it was the galaxy that was now standing on shaking legs. Old protocols began to unlock one by one, programs written long before the Council had declared this war. Silent codes meant for only one purpose: survival through overwhelming precision. Earth's orbital mirrors came online, bending light around entire fleets, turning warships into invisible shapes gliding through space, and black flag transmissions started humming beneath alien frequencies, signals the Council couldn't trace. Couldn't jam, couldn't stop. It wasn't noise, it was silence with a blade inside it, and it cut deeper than any weapon. On the bridge of the alien command ship, the surviving admirals screamed at each other, demanding to know how a single world could humiliate them like this. One admiral slammed his fist against the console and shouted that humans were cowards, hiding in the dark. Another screamed that their sensors were useless. A third whispered what no one wanted to say aloud, that this wasn't war. This was extermination. The same word they had used against Earth, but now it was aimed back at them. In that same moment, at the far edge of the Sol system, the first Leviathan rose from the darkness like a mountain lifting from the sea, its black hull larger than any alien dreadnought, its edges sharpened to swallow the light around it. Entire fleets could disappear beneath its shadow. It carried no banners, no name, just silence, and inside it, human crews moved like they had been waiting their whole lives for this moment. This wasn't about rage or revenge. This was about a promise humanity had made to itself: never again. Would they let someone else decide their fate? Back on the Council's homeworld, panic was spreading like wildfire. The very same politicians who had laughed during the vote now whispered behind closed doors, asking each other if the humans had always been this strong, wondering why they hadn't seen it. But the truth was simple. They had never cared to look. They were blinded by their numbers, and now those numbers meant nothing. 10 fleets had become a scattered storm, while a single, silent enemy moved with the precision of a blade drawn long ago. The Terran delegate, who had sat in silence during the vote, now stood in a dark room, watching a screen filled with red blips. His hands folded behind his back, no joy in his face, only cold focus. He whispered to himself words no alien could understand. "They laughed because they thought they knew us," he said. "They forgot we built our strength in the shadows." And as he spoke, across space, the Leviathan's engines came fully alive, lighting the darkness like a star about to burn everything in its path. This was the lesson the galaxy had forgotten, the lesson humanity had carried like a scar. Numbers don't win wars. Will does. And in the silence of the void, it was humanity's will that roared the loudest. The Council had declared war to remind Earth of its place, but it was the galaxy that was now learning who humans really were. The alien fleets had always believed that numbers were everything, that if they stacked enough ships, enough carriers, enough guns, they could crush any world. But on the day they entered Sul, they learned what it meant to face something that didn't care about numbers. The sky over Earth was black and cold, but the moment the first Council fleet crossed the jump gate, the stars themselves seemed to disappear. The air between worlds turned heavy, as if the void was holding its breath. Thousands of alien ships moved forward like a shining wall of arrogance, their banners bright, their formations perfect, their admirals convinced that this would be their glorious victory march. But then the space around them changed. It twisted, it folded, and everything they thought they understood fell apart. The alien command ships entered the system first, broadcasting their arrival across every frequency, announcing their strength like conquerors. They didn't know that every broadcast was being absorbed, translated, mirrored back into silence by Earth's black flag systems. Their voices vanished into the dark. They were shouting into a void that no longer listened as their fleets spread out. Invisible gravity wells, hidden across the solar system, snapped open like jaws. Their carefully planned formations cracked apart. Entire wings were pulled off course. Their dreadnoughts spun out of alignment. And before a single shot had been fired, the Council's perfect war machine began to fall apart. Then, the Leviathan-class ships revealed themselves. One by one, they rose from the shadows like living mountains, silent and black, their armor eating the starlight, their engines moving without heat, without light, without fear. The aliens had seen ships before, but nothing like this. These weren't ships. They were fortresses born from rage and patience. Every one of them carried enough firepower to wipe out entire fleets. And there wasn't just 1 or 2 or 10, there were hundreds, each surrounded by swarms of small black drones, moving like smoke through water. The alien admirals stared at their screens, their pride melting into dread, because for the first time in their lives, they understood they were not the hunters, they were the cornered. The first strike from the Leviathan fleet came not with a warning but with a whisper. Railguns the size of towers lit up the darkness, their slugs traveling faster than light's reflection, punching through alien dreadnoughts like paper. In seconds, the leading formation was gone. 1,000 ships shattered into fire and debris. The Council tried to respond, screaming orders across broken channels, but their weapons couldn't find their targets. Their targeting systems were blind, their scanners jammed by shadows that moved too fast and too quiet. Their ships fired into the black, hitting nothing, while the human fleet tore them apart piece by piece. Every time an alien ship tried to retreat, they found themselves caught in a web of gravity wells and false coordinates. Pulled straight into the path of Terran fire, their numbers didn't save them. It betrayed them. Big fleets made big targets. And humanity had built this battlefield to be theirs long before the Council had even imagined war. In the middle of the chaos, one alien admiral shouted over the static, begging for his ships to form a wall, but the wall was already broken. Their proud 10-to-1 advantage was gone, like smoke in a storm. On the bridge of the Leviathan Aegis Prime, Captain Mara Stone stood in silence, her crew moving like a single organism. They didn't cheer, they didn't scream, because this wasn't victory, it was execution. "Mark next wave," she said, her voice calm and cold. The next volley of rail fire swept across the stars like a blade cutting through silk. Another 1,000 alien ships vanished from the map. Another proud fleet turned into floating wreckage. This was the moment the Council finally understood the truth. They had never been fighting against ships, they had been fighting against time, against something that had been waiting, watching, preparing for decades. Down in the Council's central formation, panic spread like fire. Alien crews screamed into dead comms, trying to reach command, but their leaders had already lost control. Ships collided, systems failed, admirals shouted for retreats that didn't exist. One captain begged to surrender, another cursed the Council for their arrogance. But none of it mattered anymore. The Black Fleet moved forward like a tide, swallowing everything in its path. Back on Earth, in the underground command center, the red light that had been blinking for days turned solid. It meant the system was locked. No more waiting, no more patience. Every weapon Earth had built in silence was now unleashed. Orbital rail platforms opened fire in synchronized precision. Kinetic rounds raining down like silent meteors. Invisible mines detonated across the system, slicing through carrier wings. And the Leviathan fleet closed in like giants stepping through smoke. The last thing one alien admiral saw on his screen was not a transmission, not a demand for surrender, but a single Terran symbol glowing like a heartbeat. And then everything went black. The Council had entered Sol with the power of 10 fleets, the largest armada the galaxy had ever seen, but in less than an hour. They were nothing but burning wreckage, drifting in silence. The fall of numbers was complete, and humanity had proven what they had always known. Victory isn't in how many ships you have. It's in how prepared you are to fight for everything you stand for. The battlefield was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy, suffocating kind that comes after something unstoppable has swept through everything. The Council's grand fleets, once bright banners of arrogance, were now broken and burning in the dark. Ships that were supposed to symbolize power drifted without purpose, their lights flickering like dying stars. Bodies of admirals and soldiers floated in the cold void, swallowed by the same silence they once mocked. There were no victory speeches, no music, no glorious retreat, just a galaxy forced to listen to the sound of its own defeat. In the center of it all, the Leviathan fleet stood like black statues against the stars, their hulls gleaming faintly under the dying embers of alien wreckage. Thousands of human ships held their position without moving, without transmitting a single word. No celebration, no announcement, just a wall of quiet power. The galaxy had never seen a fleet like this, not because it didn't exist, but because humanity had never needed to show it before. They had built their strength in shadows, prepared not to conquer but to survive, and when survival was tested, their silence became louder than the Council's greatest war cries. The surviving alien commanders sent desperate messages, broken signals filled with fear and disbelief. They begged for a ceasefire. Their voices cracked, their pride gone. They asked why humans hadn't surrendered like every other species would have, why they had stayed quiet, why they hadn't shown this power before. But humanity didn't answer. Their silence was their answer. They hadn't done this for revenge. They had done it to make sure no one would ever forget again. On board the Leviathan Aegis Prime, Captain Mara Stone stood at the edge of the bridge, looking out into the wreckage. The crew didn't cheer, they didn't smile. They just stood in silence, breathing steady, knowing what this moment meant. "Transmit it," Mara said softly. And a single coded signal was sent across the galaxy, just 3 words, cold and final. "You forgot us." Those words echoed through the Council's remaining ships, through their homeworlds, through every political chamber that had once laughed during the vote. They thought they had erased humanity from the galactic equation. They thought humans were weak, small, temporary, but they were wrong. Back on Earth, in the underground command room that had watched everything unfold, the red light finally dimmed. The operators leaned back in their chairs. Exhausted but silent, there was no applause, no fireworks. Because they understood the cost of this silence, humanity had shown its hand to the galaxy, and nothing would ever be the same again. They had reminded them not through words, but through what they had always done best, enduring, fighting, surviving. In the Council's capital, panic turned to realization, and realization turned to fear. Leaders who once laughed, in their marble halls, now whispered behind sealed doors, asking what would happen if humanity ever decided to attack. If the silent fleet they saw today was only the beginning, and deep down, they already knew the answer. They had underestimated a species that had always thrived in the shadows. Above the Council's broken fleet, the Leviathans slowly began to turn, their black hulls fading back into the void. They didn't stay to conquer. They didn't demand tribute or surrender. They simply left, leaving behind a message that would stain the memory of every world that raised a hand against them. The galaxy outnumbered humanity 10-1, but they forgot who humans were. They forgot what silence meant, and they forgot what happens when you push a species that never gives up. As the last human ship disappeared into the darkness, a young alien officer, stranded on a broken cruiser, whispered to himself, "They never wanted power," his voice shaking as he stared into the empty void where the Black Fleet had been. "They wanted us to remember, and the galaxy would. They would remember the day they thought numbers made them gods. And the humans reminded them that strength is not in how many ships you have, but in who you are when the world turns against you." From that day forward, The stars carried a story whispered in every language, from the richest homeworld to the smallest colony. A story about the species that rose from silence and burned an empire of arrogance to ash. And the last words they left behind would echo for generations. You forgot us.